Okay, so we've got a lot of progress today. I had a serious technical difficulty with the wiring on the Super-Chuffer. It was really my fault because I'm not an electronics guy. I did not understand exactly what I was doing and had to get with GunrunnerJohn, who is the designer of the Super-Chuffer, of the Chuff-Generator, and of this little gizmo, the Your Last Battery, which is basically a capacitor unit that charges off the center rail and carries the power. You don't have to use 9-volt batteries. It's a spendy little gizmo, but I went this far, bought all that stuff. I wanted to go that far. So, what I've got here, this is my Berk Jr. that's going to be White Pass in Yukon. It was Pennsylvania Railroad, and it was actually the chassis off my original conventional Polar Express. I bought a different Berk Jr. that was factory TMCC. I got it for such a cheap price that it was so much cheaper to turn the Polar Express into TMCC with all the equipment out of the original Berk Jr. or the parts donor than it was to do all of this. But I kept the Berk Jr. parts donor and decided it needed to become something Alaskan. And Skagway, Alaska, going into Canada, the White Pass and Yukon route, which still operates today, was built for the gold rush of the Klondike and the Yukon. So, first thing I had done was installed this Cruise Commander unit from the Electric Railroad by Third Rail, and the sound unit, their sounds, medium steam sound card. I had to modify the brackets that holds the card. That's a Lionel bracket. They call it a Rail Sounds Light bracket. Or the card they call it when Lionel uses this style card is Rail Sounds Light. So it's the holder for that. I had to modify it because this little mount was on the end, and Lionel doesn't make one that sits that way in a tender. If this stood upright, it would have hit the bottom of the shell. The back edge of the tender frame is filled from the top side with the speaker, and I've got a little constant voltage unit in there set to run the tail lights because I did not want those to come on and off with the headlights or the backup lights. So I've got all this hooked up. I changed the trucks to 6-axle or 6-wheel, 3-axle Berkshire trucks. Got the electrocoupler hooked up. That's back there. We'll get that closed for right now. Got all that part installed first. Got the motor working first. Modified the smoke unit. This was originally a piston smoke unit in here that ran off of an armature of a cam off the drivers. This is now a MTH smoke unit. This is the one that everybody, including GunrunnerJohn, suggests to use over the Lionel ones. They say you can't do it, but this is the one that seems to be the favorite. It had its own. This one came with its own little bracket. Let me see if I can focus, but it was more than likely for a steam locomotive, but it wasn't exactly right. I cut off the tab that had the headlight that would go up under and spun the bracket 180 degrees. This tab used to point back, the top was forward. That allowed me to screw this to the steam chest, and I put a little Z in the leg, and that allowed me to set the height and center under the smokestack on the boiler shell. This little copper tube is what I'm using to get the smoke from the smoke unit into the stack. This is all fan driven, and this is why I went to the Super-Chuffer, which is this little guy here. Super-Chuffer. You get these at Henning's Trains. Also, to do that was a programmable Chuff-Generator. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the Super-Chuffer runs the headlights under what they call Rule 17, I believe it is, which at idle goes dim. As soon as it starts chuffing, this goes bright. It also runs a cab light, which I have the plug on the card, but I don't have the plug hooked to anything yet because that's going to go on the boiler shell. The Chuff The Super-Chuffer runs the fan on the smoke unit. It synchronizes the fan motor with the sound of the chuff as the motor goes along, or as the locomotive goes along. So every time the motor, you hear the chuff sound, the smoke generator puffs, or the smoke unit puffs. To fire all that, I could have used the reed switch that came with the sound card and the little magnet that would go on one of the wheels under the tender and let it pick up that. But what I did instead was I used GunrunnerJohn's Chuff-Generator. This little gizmo does a couple of things. Its primary job in life, it has a little reader. I'm trying to focus so you can see it's got a little reader that reads, on this case, a very tiny little tape strip, and it actually reads it, but a tape strip, and you set this through little jumper leads that go down in those two little openings in the foreground there, the two little contacts. There's a whole programming sequence. It's not too hard, but there's a programming sequence for setting up how many rotations the wheels make versus, or how many times the smoke chuffs versus how many times the wheels rotate. So this little unit does that, and it sends a signal to the Super-Chuffer unit, but it also sends a signal to the TMCC cruise commander, which then sends the signal to the sound card. The reed unit would actually plug straight into the sound card, and then you'd have to get all the wiring back to this. But this is the cool way. But this this Chuff-Generator, it also runs ground lights, which are the lights that would go under the running boards and shine down on the wheels for people to work on. As soon as the locomotive starts moving and gets to a particular speed, the ground lights shut off automatically. So the Chuff-Generator runs that. The other thing that I got from GunrunnerJohn and put into this build, and I'm thinking I'm going to call this the $6 million locomotive, kind of like Steve Austin, the $6 million man, if you're old enough to know about the Bionic Man. The Your Last battery. That replaces your regular 9-volt batteries. I mentioned that earlier. That just, the red wire goes to the center roller lead. It picks up the ground from the sound card plug that you would put the battery in, and that will maintain the sounds. It will never leak. It does its job. Basically runs everything. But so, after having technical difficulties with that and making some mistakes, getting with GunrunnerJohn, and I owe him a great debt of gratitude. He has helped me out and got me back on track, so to say, with all this. And I finally have this all hooked up. So let me show you what this does. I know this is getting kind of long, but it's not like I can just blurt this out in seconds. Let me get some power to the test track here. So, we're hot. Right now, TMCC is not up, so smoke unit is not coming on. Nothing is happening. As soon as I cycle something on the TMCC, the whole thing starts coming to life. And if you look, the smoke unit is starting to puff. The fan runs at idle to, one, keep the smoke unit from burning up, but also it just sits there and steams, makes it look like a steaming locomotive at idle. But as rotation starts coming to the drivers, you'll see the smoke unit is now chuffing. It is puffing with the chuff in synchronization. And you can see the little flashing light on the Chuff-Generator. That's the firing where it's determining where everything is. So we've got that. Now the headlight, as we're running here, kick this down. As soon as it stops chuffing for just a matter of time, the headlight goes dim. And the smoke unit goes back to an idle, just a constant low power steam. You start chuffing again, headlight goes bright again. The cab light will shut off, like I said, I don't have that hooked up. So this whole thing, I've pretty much got everything going. I had to install the smoke switch still, what the smoke switch does. And if you watch, I'll turn it off. if I can do this one-handed. As soon as I turn off the smoke switch, not only does it kill the heat element, the Super-Chuffer gets a takeoff from the power going to the smoke element, the element in the heater resistor. When it detects the lack of power going to the resistor, it shuts off the fan and turns off the whole smoke unit fan, and all is shut off. And when I turn it back on, smoke unit starts warming up, and it's a little hard to see because it's got to warm up a second there, but it is smoking again just because of that little switch. So, I have this all basically up and running. I've got to do some more modifications to the shell. I am going to play with some flicker LEDs. I got some red and yellow flicker LEDs. I'm going to try to make a boiler light to go inside the boiler opening, so I've got to cut where the boiler door is open, where you would feed the fire, so you can actually see flickering firelight in there. I'm going to put a constant power regulator into the shell to run that. It's going to also run the front clearance lights, so that the front clearance lights come on and stay on. I don't want them to shut off when the train goes into the reverse. But I just need to start tucking wires away. I've got some what's called liquid tape, which will allow me to go through and basically insulate every one of those solder joints, so that I can take these wires here and lay them over and then feed them through that little depression in the frame, and then bring them over past the motors and into where all this goes. Right now I've just got some zip ties just kind of keeping it in place because we're making sure it works. And by gosh, it does. And again, GunrunnerJohn, you guys probably know him from the OGR forum, and I'm sure he's on Harry's page over at his O-Gauge page, because I know those guys are buddies, of course, because of Henning's trains and all that. But this is... This is a not your average TMCC locomotive. It's got features, thanks to GunrunnerJohn, that you see in some of the better ones. I just wanted to see if I could do this, and because I bought 2 of everything, I've got another project after I get this one done and painted and get a little further down the road. So, yeah, next stop will be when we get a few more things done and get the boiler shell stripped of paint and start making the rest of the train look like White Pass and Yukon. So, thanks for watching.